Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good afternoon from the Batcave. It is Saturday, March 27th. I want to talk about another proof that the rapture's mid-trib. It's a clear one, but it's an often obscured and misunderstood one. But if you go to Luke 21 and you want to read these, you want to read each account and kind of take note of the differences between them, because this is one teaching, and yet it's represented in Matthew, Mark, and Luke slightly differently. So you want to take the composite of all these things to really understand what Jesus said, because when people chose to summarize what Jesus said or write down what Jesus said, they didn't all choose every last word that Jesus said. Again, Jesus could have been talking to these guys for hours, and what they did is chose, the highlights that they decided to take account of and represent in their gospel. So when you get down to Luke 21, you can find a general correspondence with Matthew 24, and you can see where he's going to say, "Take heed that you be not deceived, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and the time draws near. Go not after them. And when you shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by. And then he said unto them, Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines and pestilences and fearful sights, and great signs shall be from heaven. But before all these they shall lay hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and into prison, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. And it shall turn to you for a testimony. Settle it not therefore in your hearts, not to meditate on what you shall answer, for I will give you a mouth of wisdom, which your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay or resist. And you will be betrayed by both parents and brethren, and kinfolk and friends, and some of you they shall cause to be put to death. And you shall be hated by all men for my name's sake, but there shall not one hair of your head perish. In patience possess your souls." So you can compare this generally to Matthew 24, for instance, and they're going to be almost the same. It's just that Luke is going to focus more on what Jesus said about our persecution and how to handle ourselves in that persecution. If you look at Matthew, he just says, "Many will rise in my name, saying, I am Christ." And then he says, "You shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. Be not troubled, for these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." So that's almost verbatim. "For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdoms, and there shall be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in diverse places." Almost verbatim. "All these are the beginnings of sorrow. Then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated by all nations for my name's sake." So here's where it starts to divert. He just says, "Then many shall be offended and betray one another, and shall hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and deceive many, and because of iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. But he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved." So they're saying almost the same thing. It's just that Matthew's going to focus a little bit more about what Jesus said about what the atmosphere will be like when this persecution is happening, while Luke is going to focus a little bit more on how we need to be. Again, be not terrified. It shall be for you to a testimony. Settle it in your hearts, not to meditate on how you shall answer. So he's focusing more on Jesus' instructions to us during this persecution, while Matthew is focusing more on Jesus' description of the persecution. But Jesus probably said all these things, and what he probably said was much longer than what you have recorded in any of them, because again, he's speaking in the evening after they're out of the temple, and he probably is just not just giving them a 10-minute oration. He's probably giving them a couple hours of teaching like a normal teacher would. So after he gets to the end of this, he's going to go right here, and this is where they're going to be really distinct. In Luke, he says, "And when you see Jerusalem compassed by armies, then you know the desolation thereof is near." Well, in Matthew, he's going to say, so notice in Matthew, he says, "In this gospel the kingdom shall be preached in the world for a witness to all nations, and then the end shall come." Where Luke says, "And it shall turn to you for a testimony." So they're both talking about how this persecution is going to turn into the gospel being testified everywhere, because Christians aren't going to be secretly persecuted. They're going to be openly persecuted. And so they're going to be standing before all these rulers, whether they're religious leaders or political leaders, and they're going to be giving a testimony of the gospel. And that's going to carry on until this point where Jesus says in Matthew, "When you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand." And Luke is going to be a little bit different because he's going to say, and when you see Jerusalem compassed by armies, you'll know that the desolation thereof is near. So they both go right from there to let them that are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them that are in the midst of it depart not out, and let them that are in the countries not enter thereinto. So they're both telling them that this fleeing is going to happen. But he just talks about Jerusalem, Luke just talks about Jerusalem surrounded by armies and that its desolation is near, while Matthew says, when you see the abomination of desolation. So they're both talking about the same event, and you need to reconcile how these two things are said differently and how they're reconciling the same event. Well, one of the things you notice is that he never mentions Daniel here. And what's probably the case is that Jesus didn't actually say, this is in Daniel, let the reader understand. That was probably a note from the apostles when they're talking about what Jesus said to say, this is in Daniel, let the reader understand. They're probably interjecting that into what Jesus said. And so we have that in Matthew and Mark, but we don't have that in Luke. Instead, in Luke, we have Jerusalem compassed by armies and the desolation thereof being near. Well, what is that? And how do we know that that's referencing Daniel without him flat out saying it here? Well, this idea of the desolation of Jerusalem coming was in Daniel. And you got to remember, any other prophecies referring to desolation in Jerusalem was referring to its destruction under Nebuchadnezzar. So these desolations are referring to something that happens to do with the end. And it talks about the prince that comes to destroy the sanctuary, and then till the end of the war, desolations are determined, and he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even to the consummation. So this is something that it was understood that the man of lawlessness would do in the last days. And then it's also reiterated in Daniel, and Daniel's going to talk about this man of lawlessness. He's going to say in verse 31, and arms shall not stand in his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength and take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. So that connects that back to Daniel 9, that he says, he will cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he will make it desolate. So you have a very clear connection between those two things. And after these things are connected, we just have a couple of lines left in the narrative, and it says, and such as do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt by flatteries, but the people that know their God shall be strong and do exploits, and they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by sword and flame and captivity and spoil many days. He says, now when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. And some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and purge, and to make them white, even until the time of end, for it is a time yet it is for a time yet appointed. And the king shall do according to his will, and she shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper until the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. And then he says, but in his estate he shall honor the God of fortresses, the God who his fathers had not known, he shall honor with gold, silver, and with precious stones, and with pleasant things. And that's talking about the image of the beast. Thus he shall do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and they shall cause him to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And then it says, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. So notice in 39, it kind of ends with what the Antichrist accomplishes. And then it says, and at the time of the end, the king of the south shall push on him. Well, notice he says, now some of them with understanding shall fall to try them and purge them and make them white, even until the time of the end. Okay, so this is equivalent to what Jesus is talking about all these persecutions that are going to take place up to the abomination of desolation. And then this is talking about the time of the end. The time of the end will be the abomination of desolation. So he says, at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, and with chariots, and with horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. And he shall also enter into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, Moab, and the children of Ammon. So in other words, the Antichrist is taking over the Middle East, but these countries, which are all in Jordan, escape from his hand. And then he stretches forth his hand to also upon the countries in the land of Egypt shall not escape. So then he takes over Egypt. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over the precious things of Egypt, and the Ethiopians and the Libyans shall be at his steps. In other words, he's about to invade Libya and Ethiopia after he's taken over basically Iraq, Syria, and probably the Levant, and then now Egypt. And it says, but tidings out of the east and north shall trouble him, so he shall go forth with a fury to destroy and utterly make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountains, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So he's talking about everything that the Antichrist is doing leading up to the abomination of desolation. First, he starts out by telling them that he's going to pollute the temple and take away the daily sacrifice and place the abomination that makes desolate. Then he goes on to tell about the persecutions that are going to happen until he does this. And then he's going to talk about him magnifying himself above all. That's him actually doing it. And then he's going to talk about this strange God, which he honors, which helps him come to power, which is really, I believe, AI. And then he's going to talk about what he's going to do leading up to that abomination of desolation. And he's going to talk about him planting his tabernacles between his palace of the seas and the glorious holy mountains. And that's where he comes to his end. Now, if you know your eschatology, you realize that the Antichrist is destroyed by the brightness of the Lord's coming. And when he's destroyed, that's when the image of the beast is set up in his place. And the image of the beast somehow is some kind of counterfeit resurrection, as if it was him risen from the dead. So when you see this right here, this is all the stuff that's leading up to him finally doing the abomination of desolation. And so you see how it says that he's about to conquer the Libyans and the Ethiopians, and then tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with a great fury to destroy and utterly make away many. And he shall plant his tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So he's setting up his armies around Jerusalem. Again, between the seas and the holy mountain is probably in the Gaza plain, which is between the Mediterranean and Jerusalem. And that's where he's preparing to fight the kings of the east that are about to come toward him. And so it's at that time, it says that Michael shall stand up, and the great prince that stands for his people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation until that time. So I'm going to prove to you that this is very similar to what's in Luke 21, because you see it in Luke 20, he said, for these be the days of vengeance, that all the things that are written may be fulfilled. So this is the time of trouble. It's the exact same time. And when you go back and forth between Daniel 12, and when you go over to Matthew 24, he's going to say, there shall be great tribulation, such as was not from the beginning of the world, nor to this time, nor ever shall be. When you go to Luke 21, he's going to say, for these are the days of vengeance, that all those things written are fulfilled. So he's talking about this time of great trouble upon Israel. And then you go to Daniel 12, and he says there's going to be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even till that time. And at that time my people shall be delivered, everyone that is found written in the book. So notice the thing where he says, my people shall be delivered, everyone that's found written in the book. And he says, many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and content. And they that be wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as stars forever and ever. Now, Paul's going to get into this in 1 Corinthians 15, when he talks about the resurrection of the dead and how our bodies are going to be like celestial bodies. So this is actually a cryptic reference to the rapture here, but you don't need to understand that cryptic reference, because if you go back to Luke 21, he's going to say after that those are with vengeance, and all those things written be fulfilled. He's going to talk about woe to them with child, and then he's going to talk about how that Jerusalem's going to be trodden by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Then he's going to talk about signs in the sun, moon, and the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, and the sea and waves roaring. Men's hearts failing them, and for looking after those things that are coming on the earth, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then they shall see the Son of Man coming with power and great glory. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift your heads, for your redemption draws near. Okay? Now, this is another way of talking about the resurrection. Your redemption is the resurrection and the rapture. So if you go to Romans 8:23, he says, for we know that the whole earth, for the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together even until now. And not only they, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body. So the adoption is the resurrection of our body, and it's the resurrection and the rapture occurring at the same time. So when he goes back and says, your redemption draws near, remember, Luke is Paul's gospel. Luke is Paul's scribe, okay? So he's documenting the gospel that Paul preaches, okay? Romans is Paul's gospel, and both of them are saying the same thing. That redemption is the resurrection and the rapture. So he's telling you the resurrection and the rapture happens right when you see these things begin to come to pass. And what are these things going to be? These things are going to be all these signs leading up to Jerusalem being surrounded by armies. When you see Jerusalem compassed by armies, know that the abomination of desolation is near. It's the exact same thing he says in Matthew, when you see the abomination of desolation. And Luke is going to make it very clear that he says, when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draws near. So as these things come to pass, that's he wants you to be looking up, because your redemption or the rapture is drawing near. So that shouldn't be that unclear. Remember, Luke is going to spread out different things that Jesus says about eschatology in several different chapters, where Matthew and Mark are going to put them all together in Matthew 24 and Mark 13. But they're the same content. And if you line them all up, he's telling you very clearly that when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, immediately after that, the abomination of desolation is going to occur. And immediately after that, the Lord's going to appear in the clouds, and we are going to be resurrected and raptured. It's the same thing every time. So I hope you guys can make sense of these teachings. Again, all you have to do is just read what Christ said and go back to Daniel and read the passages Christ told you to go back to, and you'll understand this is very clear. The rapture is mid-trib. So hope you guys are blessed by this, and have a great weekend. Batman out. Peace.
Sorry, boy. But his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.